It says I'm waiting.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Matt. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I've been told that we are live, so welcome to the second live streamed lecture from the Royal Archaeological Institute. Excuse me. I'm Ken Smith, the president, and okay, thank you, Matt. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm getting a lot of reverb on the to the.
What have I done? Oh, bugger. I've just lost sound. Sorry, I was getting feedback off the YouTube one, and I closed that down. Can you still hear me? Okay. Sorry, yeah, Ken's froze. I'm not hearing Ken now.
That's because I stopped because I was getting a lot of echo on.
Yeah, same here. That happened to me. You were just like a loop where you were about 5 seconds behind yourself.
Exactly. Okay. I'm sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. It's still early doors as far as we're concerned with this whole process. Before introducing tonight's speaker, Neil Mahrer from Jersey Heritage, I'd like to undertake another of duties that the President has. And it gives me great pleasure to formally to announce this year's winner of the Tony Baggs Undergraduate Dissertation Prize. By way of reminder, Tony Baggs was president of the RAI from 1990 to 93. Tony was an archaeologist and architectural historian. He worked for the English Royal Commission and then as architectural editor for the Victoria County History from 1971 to 1997. For the RAI, one of Tony Baggs' legacies is this annual award alternating between an undergraduate and a master's award. And his children, Barnabas and Jenny, are, I understand, with us today or tonight. And so welcome to you both. This year is the Undergraduate Prize awarded against two principal criteria. One, the quality of the work, and the other, its appropriateness to the interests of the RAI as reflected in the Archaeological Journal, which to my mind is a pretty wide set of parameters. The award itself is a financial prize of £500, 1 year's membership subscription, and the opportunity for a paper based on the dissertation to be published in the Archaeological Journal. And the winner this year, and it's no secret as it's already been announced on the RAI website, is Yannick Signer from the University of York for his dissertation, Agricultural Change in Early Medieval Yorkshire, a Landscape Approach. The judging panel, made up of 3 members of RAI's council, considered that in a strong field, there was nevertheless a clear winner with, and I quote, an exceptional piece of work. And I wouldn't presume to add anything to that assessment. So well done, Yannick. I'd like, therefore, to congratulate Yannick, who is with us in this virtual meeting, on winning the Tony Baggs Undergraduate Dissertation Prize for 2020, to assure him that the transfer of the funds has already been made to his account, to welcome him to membership of the RAI, and hope that it continues beyond a single year. And I look forward to a paper from him in a forthcoming volume of the Archaeological Journal. And in addition, I wish him well in whatever his future holds. So congratulations, Yannick.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to receive this award. And I would like to thank my dissertation supervisor and the archaeology department in York for their support. So thank you very much.
It's our pleasure. Well done and welcome. So following that, it's difficult to generate a round of applause in the virtual context. As I'd like now to introduce tonight's speaker, the deliverer of our December lecture, which is Neil Mahrer, who is the Museum Conservator for Jersey Heritage, the body that runs the historic sites and museums on Jersey. He studied archaeological conservation at the Institute of Archaeology in London in the late 80s and has worked for Jersey Heritage ever since. Although his speciality is archaeological conservation, he has responsibility for the care of all the museum collections, so has trained and worked in other fields, including natural history conservation, environmental control, and in addition, he oversees loans of any of Jersey Heritage's collection. Since qualifying as a conservator, Neil has additionally engaged in postgraduate museum studies and has become an accredited conservator with ICON, the UK's professional conservation body. In asking Neil about his background and interests prior to today, in these pandemic-constrained times, he suggested that it would probably be like we would probably like to be spared his enjoyment of trips to the cinema and dining out with friends, with which, of course, on your behalf, I agreed. So, without further ado, I would like to ask Neil to deliver his presentation on Le Catillon II, investigating and conserving the world's largest Iron Age hoard. But if I may, just before Neil starts, while we're just setting up the lecture, those of you listening to this, I think all of you on YouTube, you may well have noticed there is a box to the right-hand side of the screen called Top Chat. At the end of Neil's presentation, he's quite happy to take questions, but we're going to have to ask you to type them into that box. And then Neil will respond to them when he's concluded his presentation. If you don't want the box to intrude in your view of these slides that Neil will be using, I suggest that you tap on the hide chat thing at the bottom of the box, and it should remove it from the screen. So Neil, without further ado, could I ask you to start your presentation?
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. I'm very new at this, so I'm working on complete trust that people can see me in my presentation. I just hope someone cuts in if there are any issues. But thank you very much for inviting me along. Yes, let's get my PowerPoint up, I hope. Wait a minute. Very new at this, as I say, share screen. I trust people can see that, I hope.
Yep.
Not good, jolly good. I'll go, give me 1 second. I promise I'll be up and running as normal shortly. Okay. Okay, yes, Catillon II. I'll start off with what might seem very, very obvious to people, just a little piece of context. We, of course, are right down here in the south of the Channel. Jersey is the southmost of the Channel Islands. And I only include the map really to make the point that our archaeology at this period they'll be talking about for the 1st century BC, it's pretty much entirely French archaeology. Our sister island, Guernsey, because it had a natural deep harbour, has got lots and lots of trade goods going right the way down to the Med. But we were rather more provincial, I fear, and all of our contacts are with the tribes on the French mainland around us. Our modern story starts with these two gentlemen, Richard Miles and Reg Mead. They're two metal detectorists on Jersey who have been metal detecting most of their lives, and we've known them for well over 20 years. They've got in touch with us before about a bronze hoard and even a shipwreck that they found. So we've had a pretty good working relationship with them. They got in touch with us at the beginning of 2012 to say that they had found a hoard of coins, about 200 or so, which had been scattered across a field in Grouville in the east of Jersey. It turns out that the reason they were looking for these is that Reg had met someone at a dinner party about 30 years before, who had remembered again about 30 years before that, when she was a child, that her father had ploughed up a pot of coins in this field, and he was in a great hurry and just ploughed them straight back into the ground. But she used to follow the plough for the next year or so, and she would collect these tokens, as I think she thought they were, and she used to swap them for comics at school. Reg, however, when she described them, realised that they were probably Armorican coins, some of the last coins produced by the Celtic tribes before being beaten by Julius Caesar. So she had been able to tell them about these, but was not very exact. And it took them about 30 years before they found the right field. So we were very, very grateful, and they found these 200 or so coins, and this was a great find. But then a couple of months later, they got back in touch with us again to say that they'd returned to the same spot with a machine called a deep seeker, which, as its name implies, is a large sort of bedstead-sized metal detector which can see down considerably further. And bang in the middle of where these coins had been scattered, they found a very, very strong signal. They dug down to it over a meter, actually stopped for lunch at one point and debated whether or not it was worth carrying on. Carried on afterwards, stopped again and agreed to give it 10 more minutes. And straight after that, when they put in the spade once more, there was a sort of clink of metal on metal. And they brought up 5 of these first century Armorican coins. So they knew they'd found something down there. And to their credit, they completely filled back in the sort of smallest possible hole they'd made and got in touch with us straight away at Jersey Heritage. So it took us about a month to assemble a team of 3 local archaeologists, 2 from Jersey and 1 from Guernsey, Dr. Phil de Jersey, who fortunately for us is an absolute world authority on coins this period, despite there being virtually none of them in Guernsey. So we assembled the team. These are the type of coins they found, not as clean as this, I fear, when they came out of the ground. These are Coriosolitae staters, about the size of a 10p, made of Billon, a mixture of copper and silver, and minted around 60 BC or so. Here's the site in the east of the island. If the camera was a bit better, you can actually see that the French coast is completely visible from here, and this field sloping down towards the sea. We still thought we were going in for what was essentially a pot of coins. So we just did a 2 by 2 meter dig, you can see here beginning, and assumed we were actually going to be out the same day. Phil actually booked a flight over to Jersey and back that evening. But by mid-afternoon, we'd actually reached the sort of coin surface. And as you can see here, it just got wider and wider, and we saw no edge to what we had assumed was a pot. And we began to realize that we were onto something bigger here. So we actually called in security to spend the night in a car next to the hole. And we all went home and came back the next morning. And after a fair bit of work the next morning, we began to see a little more clearly what we had. This is the actual outline here of the hoard. It turned out to be about 1 meter 40 by about 70 centimeters wide and about 15 meters deep on average. And down here, I'd actually dug underneath so we could find out the thickness. So we continued to dig, and it was in the sort of 3rd day, really, before we even had the full outline to the hoard. You can see here, by the time it was fully uncovered. By this time, there had been a bit of a turn in the weather, but we were fortunate in that Richard, standing in a hole here, was married to someone in the police force who was able to give us this great red scene of crimes tent, which we put over the dig. This is very useful to us, but did actually start the rumor that there'd been a murder in the island. Cars increasingly drove slower and slower along the road beside us to try and get a look. By this stage, it was very exciting to realize the size of the objects we'd found, absolutely enormous, and very worrying. So we could see that the bulk of it was made of these coins, which were essentially only held together by the sort of copper corrosion coming off their surface and sort of fusing them together. So although we knew it might weigh as much as a car, we also suspected it might be as fragile as glass. So we had to think how to actually extract this from the site. And in sort of retrospect, it was actually a good thing that we were rather rushed in this process. We had a bit of a time deadline, and we didn't have time to consult widely. So we had to figure a way to get this out of the ground in one piece as soon as we did, never actually thinking that perhaps we shouldn't. If we'd had a month to sort of discuss about how large hoards had been extracted before, we'd find that none the size had been extracted in this way in one piece before. But not knowing this, we ploughed on with our plans. And we agreed to use a suggestion of mine, which is, here's a side view of the hoard. And what we've got essentially here is about 15 centimeters thick of coins here, and then about another 30 centimeters of earth underneath it, which we actually dug down. We then dug 4 sort of palm width tunnels under the hoard, and then actually undercut the hoard as far as we dared, so that it was supported on a sort of inverted V-shaped base of earth. That's where we see it here on the final day of the dig. The top of the hoard is protected by a piece of plywood and some foam. And you can see I've made the structure out of scaffold, which actually fitted around it. Then we use these nylon tie-down straps with ratchets, which we put underneath the hoard and around the actual scaffold structure, so that when a crane came in, it could actually lift the scaffold, and these 4 would support it as sort of evenly as possible. To the left there, you can see a wooden base and a thick layer of foam. What we did is, as soon as the hoard went up into the air at all, about 6 inches, we managed to slip these underneath and lower the hoard back onto it, so that in the rest of the lift, it was actually supported from underneath. It was a very nerve-wracking process, particularly, and here's it coming out of the ground, particularly nerve-wracking because all of the press had agreed not to mention this during the week of the dig, provided that they could be there for when it came out. So this was a real back of a fag packet solution, and of course we were surrounded by the press, but fortunately it worked, and we did manage to get it onto the lorry there quite easily. The man who actually manned the crane said he reckoned with the earth on it still, it weighed around a ton when it came out of the ground. This is it back at our secure facility in one piece, to our great relief. And then came the question of what to do next. Our issue was that nothing like this had come out in Jersey for around a century or so. And it turns out that there was no treasure trove law functioning properly, no equivalent to the ones we have in England and Scotland. So no one quite knew what to do. And it was agreed by the local sort of law office and the Crown just to adopt sort of UK best practice. So it had been claimed by the Crown as treasure trove, but then put into our care, with the assumption that in the end it would be purchased by the island, who would then pay the finders and the landowner the commercial value. It took a couple of weeks to get permission to do anything else to it, but we were then given permission to actually remove all of the earth off the surface, so we could see properly for the first time what we actually had. So I decided to strip a sort of 15 centimetre layer off the top and down one side, which I did. And sure enough, we could see it was predominantly composed of coins. But we already began to see pieces of jewellery poking out. So there's a little silver bracelet here and a crushed gold tubing down here, which is actually part of a talk. So we knew that it wasn't just a simple coin hoard as we've been sort of talking about it until then. After about a month, the entire hoard was exposed, and you can see it here. As I say, about 1.40 m by 70 centimetres and about 15 centimetres thick. About 400 kilos of metal in the end, I think. So at this stage, I was able to present the sort of findings of what we believed we'd had found. And what we proposed to do with it. At this stage also, I did my first estimate of coin numbers. Again, a slightly back of the fag packet method here, but essentially I came up with the, admittedly, in retrospect, quite funnily precise number of 69,342 coins. My best bet at this point. So I produced reports in consultation with a lot of expertise, particularly from the mainland. So I had a lot of help from the British Museum, from Julia Tubman, Pippa Pierce and Marilyn Hockey there from their Archaeological Conservation Department. We had input from Cranfield University, Southampton University, Cambridge, and the team still at that stage working on the Staffordshire Hoard in England. So in consultation with them, I produced a proposal on how I thought we could disassemble the hoard here in Jersey. We had briefly discussed the possibility of leaving the hoard intact, but the fact that we could see jewellery and more material inside meant that we really did want to know what's in there. So my proposal essentially was that we could disassemble it in 3 years with 3 members of staff. It was that long because we wanted to sort of future-proof it as far as we could. As far as we knew, and I think still know, no one had got a hoard like this out of the ground in one piece before, so never had the chance to actually do, as it were, a full new excavation on it. I'm sure we've all seen sort of past write-ups of digs where you think, oh, why didn't they keep this, or why didn't they check that? So we wanted to record everything we could, even if we couldn't think immediately of why that information would be useful. So what we wanted to do, rather ambitiously, was to record every single coin individually in the hoard and record their position within the hoard. So we've been in touch with a supplier of metrology arms, which when linked to a computer can actually check the position of something within fractions of a centimetre in sort of 3 dimensions. And we knew that doing this, we could record the position of each coin. So we would have that as one database, and that we could then link that to a separate database, which we would use about each coin, literally type of coin, 2 pictures of it, both sides, age of coin, tribe type, and so forth. And then those 2 databases could be connected together so that people could actually interrogate a virtual model of the hoard once the thing itself had actually been taken apart. So one could search for all coins of over 100 BC, all gold coins, all coins from a particular tribe, and you would see where they would be within the actual 3-dimensional bulk of the object itself. It took a long time to persuade people that this was going to work. But by early 2014, we had permission from the Crown and our local government to go ahead and funding for the best part of £250,000. Part of which went on the cost of the equipment itself, this 6-axis metrology arm, and the rest for staff costs. So in 2014, we began the actual disassembly of the object itself. We did it in what we called the open lab. We determined from the start that people could come in and see all the work being done as far as possible. So all the work was done literally behind a sort of glass wall. We would go out and talk to people a great deal. This wasn't just because we thought it was best practice, but it was also because we knew that at some point at the end of this project, the island would be asked to essentially pay for this hoard, and that it would be a substantial amount of money. So we were keen to engage local sort of public interest as far as possible. One sort of slight conflict of interests, because it had to be on show for 3 years, is that it had to be visible to the public, but not dry out. This had obviously come out of the ground extremely damp, and we wanted to maintain that moisture level within it. So I made a slightly sort of homemade device where there was a tube that ran over the top of the hoard, connected to an ultrasonic humidifier, which essentially produced a cold mist of de-ionized water that then trickled over the surface of the hoard the entire time it was not being worked on, so as to keep the right moisture level. We wanted to do this because as soon as we began to work on it, we found there was a great deal of organic material still within the hoard, which we wanted to preserve. This is the arm I talked about. I'll just give you a little clip of this rather than the whole piece, but essentially to show that on one very complex object we're working on here, the remains of a purse full of coins. We wanted to record the remaining coins around it. So, excuse the noise. I have to talk over myself, but essentially what we do is we use this probe to touch 3 points on the outside of one of the coins. There you go, 3 points across the middle. It's a ridiculously hard coin to log to show you this. But essentially, they go 3 points across the middle, 3 points around the edge. And then that coin is now recorded. To give you a view of how it works more quickly normally, here's the view you get on the computer screen. So 3 points across the middle, 3 points around the edge of the coin, and it appears on the computer model. We then give that disk a number, coin 1 or coin 69,000, depending where on the project we were. That coin could then be safely removed, and we could move on to the next coin. And over a day's work, we would use something like this. This literally is about 200 coins, which would be a fairly normal day's removal for us. Each of the coins has got their own number, and all of these coins have got, that are shown on this model have now been removed from the bulk of the hoard, each of them going into their own small plastic bag with that number on it. So this model is basically a three-dimensional grid of where all of the coins that were removed were. It shows the size of the coins, their orientation and their position within the hoard. Theoretically, it was accurate to around 50 microns, but doing my own tests, I was happy in the end to say that they were all accurate within perhaps half a centimetre, perhaps 5 millimetres. An extremely useful machine. And once we got the thing up and running, it didn't actually delay the project that much. We worked quite efficiently with it. To put all of the day's works together, to literally log all of the different ones together, we had a series of these stainless steel spheres which were pushed into the hard earth beneath the hoard. So each day we would log those 200 coins or so, and then log the position of 3 or 4 of these spheres. We could then, by matching those up to the spheres in our large model, import the new data onto that and add it each day. The second thing we could do with the scanner is actually use it as a laser scanner, here being experimented on with one of my unfortunate assistants. We wanted to use this partly to record the actual process of the work itself, of the hoards coming apart. And we did that at various stages. But we also did it specifically because once we began to find the large forks and other objects, the sort of point probe system we'd use for recording all the points wasn't actually working that well for that. So by registering these scans models using the same spheres, we could actually bring out the port for other objects and again import those into the final model. Here is, well, you've all seen this kind of laser scanning before, but here is a recording of a fairly typical part of the coin hoard surface. It was actually good enough that you could make out the coin details. It really was quite an impressive system. One thing we did experimentally, but has been made obsolete by advances in technology, so excuse me, is that you can then superimpose photographic evidence on top of your three-dimensional model. So this was a test we did fairly early on. This is fairly time consuming, and as a technology, it's actually been made obsolete by the fact that the more recent versions of the metrology arm and scanner now actually record live video at the same time as they use the laser. So in fact, it produces a perfect colored model of the object. Which we had one of those at the time. One thing I found out fairly quickly, perhaps predictably, is that there was no way we were going to do this project in 3 years just with the 3 of us. So we assembled a team of volunteers to come and work with us. And in the end, we had over 20 people working with us. They did a lot of the basic coin cleaning and recording, the actual doing both sort of databases, which allowed us to do the more hands-on on the hoard object itself and the cleaning of some of the more prestigious objects. Cleaning of the coins themselves, the conservation is fairly simple. We used a system which the British Museum were already using on some quite similar coins from the Bure Street hoard from Bath. Essentially, we, after an initial cleaning to get rid of earth, the coins were immersed in 15% formic acid for around 12 hours and then scrubbed clean again and then rinsed in a succession of baths to get rid of any traces of the acid. The only complication on this process is that because each of the coins had an actual number, we had to keep track of that right through the process. So we used these converted ice cube trays here with holes in the bottom. You can see that this tray for our recording purposes would be tray Y, and it would have 14 sort of tubs, 1 to 14. So on an Excel spreadsheet and on paper records, we would record that, for instance, coins 36295 and 256 went into tub 1 and so forth, so that we could keep track of them right through the process. This works well. The coins, this is actually the sort of finished clean state of the coins. You can see here, though, wet. We didn't try to get a sort of completely museum presentation finish on all of them. If we removed enough of the corrosion that we could identify which kind of coins they were and that they were stable, then we thought that would do. So this was what we used on virtually all of the coins, one exception being a coin being treated here, coin number 66,666. By the time we came to this at the end of the project, I had been asked around 66,000 times by people, had I tried coke, which is the thing people always think of in metal detecting and coins. So rather than just repeat the usual speech, we decided that we would do one coin with coke. We had thought about doing blind tests with cherry coke or Pepsi, but we just did the one coke, which we're seeing pouring on while I wear full PPE gear here. The coins sat in this coke for about 5 days, looking sad and not changing very much. So at the end, we brought it out and treated it just like the others. But at least we can now say to people that we have tried the coke method, although I don't think that will result in a paper. In addition to all the coins, as you could see before, we'd already found a surprising to us amount of this gold jewellery. Quite a lot of it was gold torques and also remains of gold torques. The ones you can see in the tubs down there, although they appear to be sort of solid, have actually made a very thin gold sheet, about 0.7 mil thick, as we found out, and some of them had been squashed flat, like the one in the sort of top right there. We knew by this stage that there was quite a lot of analytical work we could do on materials being found in this hoard. So we didn't straight away go for sort of chemical cleaning with that formic acid again, which, although it's effective, would possibly have affected analytical results on the actual makeup of any alloys and so forth by preferentially removing silver or copper from the gold alloy. What we did for the bulk of the cleaning, that trick I picked up from Kate Greaves, who'd worked on the Staffordshire hoard, which was to use thorns in a little pin vise here. These are berberis thorns from her own stash, which she was kind enough to share with me a few times. And the thorn was very useful in that it was soft enough to use on the surface of the gold without scratching it, but actually stiff enough to remove the overlying corrosion. The gold itself, of course, hadn't corroded at all. There was a lot of copper corrosion on the surface from the surrounding coins and so forth. And the connection to the surface was usually quite brittle, and it could just be picked off. We found a great number of the torques, and rather than remove them one at a time, we actually left them as they built up one by one for a few months, till we could say to the public that we were going to remove them all in 1 week. So we said, do come along for that week, and we will remove typically one object in the afternoon and one in the morning. And you can get an idea of the kind of crowds we got here. It was just great, really, really good humoured event. This is Richard, one of the two finders, holding one of the torques, which I think was quite a good moment for him. And as we got below the torques, towards the bottom of the hoard, we began to find a variety of quite different material. I'm not an archaeologist, so I won't necessarily talk about what this might have meant to people, but obviously we have our own theories. But rather than simply coins and pieces of jewellery, we began to find, for instance, objects like this Bronze Age bronze spearhead, held here by Olga Finch, our curator of archaeology. Now, what I find interesting, and again, I know this is open to various interpretations, but there was essentially no scrap bronze in this hoard. If any of the metal was scrap, it was all gold and silver. And there were only 2 bronze objects in the whole hoard. One very mysterious cast object, if you don't know what it was, and this spearhead. And of course, the spearhead was over about 1,000 years old at the time it was buried by these Celts. So I don't think it's just a piece of random scrap metal. I think it meant something to them. And essentially, they were curating their own collection here. Also, right at the bottom of the hoard, we found a number of ingots. These are of the same copper-silver alloy mix as the coins. And in fact, on some of these ingots, we could actually see half-melted coins poking out of the surface. So we don't know whether possibly at the time of the burial, there had been a process of melting down the coins to make these ingots, or vice versa. We just don't know. Also, we found a little bag of pieces which appeared to belong to someone who worked with jewellery. Someone who had a sense of humor, I think, in how someone in the future might have to deal with them. Because when I came to clean these, I found they were all linked together. In this case, he had undone a little silver bracelet and wrapped all the pieces through it before tightening it up again. And of course, it's now, I suspect, far too brittle for me to undo it. So all cleaning would have to be done like that. And similarly, on this second piece, rings and a bracelet and a couple of other things had been looped through this very, very, very pretty little brooch. We also found a number of glass beads, most of them clear, but in this case, a very beautiful dark red glass with these pieces of yellow sort of features of glass mixed in. We believe these were actually made by the Gauls. We know there have been ones like this found before. There were some in a museum in Paris with a very, very similar type, all strung onto a bracelet. So at this stage, we pretty much got down to the bottom of the hoard. And just to give you a little condensed view of what 3 years were like, we did a little time lapse day by day. So you can see it was an exciting process of more and more gold appearing for a large part of the work. And then going. And you can see a pillar still being kept at one stage here. As the rest of it goes down, you'll see one area we've left full height. And that was a part of a research bit we did where we kept 1,500 coins uncleaned, and then specifically kept this pillar completely untreated so that it was still full of the earth, organic remains and everything else from the time it was buried. So that was what we had thought at the beginning would be the end of the entire process. We asked all of our volunteers who worked on the project to come in to see the end of the hoard. And so we got Reggie and Richard, our two finders, to hold one each of the two remaining connected coins, which they then snapped apart. And we regarded that as the end of it as a hoard. As I said, that was 3 years in, and we had assumed that that would pretty much be the process when we began. But it became apparent pretty much from the time we started taking it apart that there was this huge prospect for research. We hadn't really thought enough about at the beginning. We put some tens of thousands of pounds for research, but that all went very quickly, and in the end, just gave us a taste of what could be done. So as this wound to a halt in 2017, we had a conference where we invited people with expertise in jewellery and the Iron Age culture in both France and Britain at this period, and the sort of technologies involved to suggest a sort of framework for how we could go ahead. And we produced this framework, which had a pretty similar budget to the first one, again, over £200,000. And unfortunately, 3-4 years later, we're still sort of scrabbling to get that going. But some of the reasons we knew that we wanted to get on with this was, one factor is we found a huge amount of organic material within the hoard. This is right in the middle, about as far deep into the hoard as you can get. And it's just the tip of a piece of bracken, the sort of fern leaf there. And we found more and more of this kind of material, which we never find elsewhere in the island. Jersey soil is quite acidic, and we find very little organic material remaining. We think in this case that the hoard essentially sterilized itself, because it was 400 years of, 400 kilos of silver and copper. It essentially stopped all sort of bacterial activity within itself. So we found a lot of plant material like this. We found various arthropods, including insects, millipedes, centipedes, springtails, all sorts of things like that. And textiles. There was no sign of the coins in the hoard themselves being in bags, as there had been in the Bath Roman hoard, for example. They do appear to be simply poured into a hole in the ground. But there were very smaller scraps of textiles. We found 5 different types, as far as we know so far. 1 wool, and the rest plant-based. Intriguingly, apparently by the actual spin of the fibers in the warp and the weft, something I'm not an expert in, it looks like 3 of the 5 pieces of textile we find probably came from the Mediterranean, so were presumably quite sort of high status trade goods. In at least 2 cases, they were actually wrapped around jewellery and things. So that was interesting. We have begun to X-ray all the jewellery and so forth that we found, first in our local hospital, who were very helpful, but then at a somewhat higher resolution at the labs of Birmingham Museum, who've been a great help to us. What we can see here is that there is still a core of iron actually within the gold sort of foil, just making the surface, and the rest of the space is now filled with what is essentially rust. We believe it probably would originally, but it's interesting. I had assumed that everything was well known about how these were made, but it turns out not. There's still a lot of debate about just how these talks were made. Here's a view of the same one, showing the same thing again. Very, very thin gold. Interestingly, we think the gold was supplied in sort of 4 centimetre wide strips, and then probably just sort of cold welded together by pressure, and the joints are pretty much invisible. On this one here, by X-ray, you can see a series of these white lines, perhaps, which are where the gold sheets butt by a fraction of a millimetre over each other. This is the final block which we left disassembled. The X-ray, unfortunately, couldn't really see anything, as we had assumed it might, but that is still waiting. One of the other objects that we X-rayed here is one of the last things, again, we found right on the bottom, a peculiar selection of objects at the bottom of the pit. And it's actually a purse made of leather with 2 large metal rings at the top and a peculiar strap going all the way around the bottom, which has a metal herringbone sort of pattern to it, which we don't fully understand yet. I believe this purse is pretty much unique as a survivor of this period, actually, and certainly have something of this period organic survive for us is very, very new. Again, at the labs at Birmingham, we began to do X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy on some of the gold jewellery. I know it's subject to big debate just how useful this kind of work is, and it's best not to rely on the figures as being definite, but it did give us a fairly clear idea, as you might be able to see here, that a very high gold content, almost all above 95% from what we could see. And a last piece here, just a very, very simple thing. There'd been some suggestion that there was the equivalent of sort of Celtic pound, some sort of weight that they would have used. So we looked at all the various ingots and their weights in grams as shown here, but we weren't able to find any kind of pattern really at all. The last thing I will show you here is something that was a surprise where it came from, but did sort of vindicate the work we've done to some extent. We haven't still yet got around to matching the 2 databases together so that the spatial data at very high resolution within the Horde can be applied to what we know about the coins. But we do have it at somewhat sort of cruder level. We used a backup system for the coin positioning of that white grid you may have seen around where we were working. So all the coins are also logged to a sort of 4 centimetre cube. And Richard, one of the 2 finders, got his son, who did a lot of statistical work, to do a sort of map of the coin compositions within the Horde at that sort of 4 centimetre resolution. So what you've got is the hoard looking down. It's that sort of egg shape here, looking down from the top. And what it shows essentially is that the colors refer to the actual type of coins from the Coriosolitae tribe that we found. The classes 4, 5, and 6 up in red are the first coins of the sort of series that they made, perhaps 10 or 20 years before the war with Caesar. They had higher silver content than the classes 1, 2, and 3 in blue down the bottom there, which were down to sort of 10% silver in some cases. And what we find is that the hoard appears to be composed of 2 separate hoards poured at the same time into the same pit. First of all, the older, better coins were poured in, along with the ingots, the peculiar object collection, and all of the gold jewellery. And then on top of that, the last coins that these tribes made, probably for the fight against Caesar, were then poured in on top. So it's possible that may show that this was 2 separate hoards, as I say, now sort of surviving as one. And that's pretty much where we stand now, except that we have been able to send all of our gold jewellery to Orléans in France for metallurgical analysis as part of the large Iron Age Horde, gold work project that's going on. We had hoped to have all the results back by now, but once again, this has all been stopped by COVID. So we are still waiting for those results. And we are waiting for funding for the second phase of research that we hope for. And that is all held up again by local politics, I fear, which is that the process of finding out what the hoard was worth was initially done by the Treasury Valuation Committee, as the same way it would be in the UK. But that result was disputed by the finders and the landowner, who then commissioned their own valuation, which, as you might have guessed, was considerably higher. And for a couple of years since then, that's been the subject of sort of horse trading with our local government and the Crown. We had hoped and been told that that was going to be resolved this year, but once again, it's fallen prey to COVID. So until that question is resolved and we get access to the field, which is currently denied by the landowner, the sort of phase 2 research is rather in abeyance. So one's final image there of our rather lovely hoard. And that is, I think, about it for me. So I'll bring this down. And can people see me again? I'm a little uncertain. So I'll minimize the whole thing. Am I visible now?
You were, yes.
Okay, well, that's the end of my talk. If there are any questions that people have, I would be pleased to hear them.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'm having a slight problem with accessing the questions, because if I go into YouTube, it creates the feedback,
Right.
excuse me, and all the echo that we had at the beginning. So I don't know whether on YouTube, is that Matt? Go back into
met just with stunned silence, as so many.
stunned. I think quite apart from I mean, I would imagine that one runs out of superlatives, Neil, for such an astonishing hoard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of a few numbers, it's the biggest hoard of type found in Britain. It's the biggest Celtic hoard that's ever been found. It's the biggest number of talks like that. that have ever been found. Oh, just one personal note of pure boasting, I will add. You recall in 2012, I did an estimate of 69,342 coins. Well, when we went over the numbers again for the second evaluation about 18 months ago, our curator of archaeology came back to me and said, we can't use this, we can't say this, because the number was 69,342. So I had a day or two of absolute bliss, pointing I'd been right for 6 years, and then particularly a few more coins came and went. But I'm still within about 20.
That's astonishing. I was impressed with the exactitude of that number when
Yes.
even though it was an estimate. But what I was also taken with was the foresight with which you and the team were able to plot the three-dimensional recording and all the rest of it, but also, particularly from my particular perspective, the PR element, the recognition that there was going to need to be a significant fundraising and that early engagement with members of the public to enable people to feel ownership, engagement, and with the ambition, of course, obviously, that they wouldn't then mind at least the purse, the collective purse being dipped into.
Yeah, I mean, we would have tried to do the same thing, I suspect, even if there'd been no purely sort of financial reason for doing it. But we knew, and we are still waiting for this to happen, that at some stage there will be a proposal that this is purchased for a considerable amount of money, and that some politician at that point will point out correctly that it is that or a hospital ward or a kidney machine or something like that. And we had to get a sense of local ownership about this and a feeling that, people were involved. To some extent, that's why we were pleased to have a large volunteer team as well, because they're just a very effective sort of series of goodwill ambassadors for the project itself as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Matt, are there any questions on the chat? Well,
perhaps we've been alone the entire time. Who knows? That's something.
Well, that's good. I do hope that it's not because there are problems with gaining access to it, but
of course, I'm more than happy to come back to questions later.
Sure.
Post this broadcast by all means.
Yeah. But I suppose the only another element that struck me was because of the size of the hoard and the length of time it has necessarily taken to dismantle it, if that's the most appropriate term. It was interesting that the pace of digital work outstripped your timescale for doing the work. The obsolescence that occurred.
Yeah, I mean, the machinery, that in itself, enough, we were quite lucky in our initial delay in that way, because when Farrow, the company who made the machine, came over and actually showed it to us first in 2012, we were immediately impressed and realised that would do what we wanted. They were saying that their machines were about £60,000. And we were saying, oh, blimey, the most we could possibly afford would be perhaps around 40. And this wasn't game playing. That was literally the most we knew we could possibly fundraise. And then it was another 2 years before we were in a position to actually buy it. And so what happened was every couple of months, someone would come to us and say, look, we can do one for £53,000 now. We say, look, we'd love it. We can only afford 40. I'm sorry. And then 2 months later, look, we can do one for 48,000 and we'll throw in the tripod. This went on and on to these poor people until in the end we all bought one for £38,000, I think. And that's been great. And the machine still works extremely well. But yes, had we had the more recent version now, it would have produced perfect, immediate 3D models in colour, which is a great thing.
Sure. That's the nature of the beast, isn't it?
Yeah.
The nature of the beast. Okay. Well, if Matt hasn't identified any questions, or if people have been stunned into silence by the presentation and by the fantastic Horde that you've worked on, I think it just behoves me to say thank you very much, Neil. It's our regret that you weren't able to come across to London, and that we could have thanked you in the normal way that we thank our speakers, by taking you out for a meal and having a more relaxed, perhaps, hour or two, and chat over and around the issues that you've dealt with so admirably this evening. So I think, on behalf of the membership, on behalf of our audience, it's a virtual and silent clap, I'm afraid. So it's heartfelt nevertheless. So thank you very much indeed.
That's
Thank
been
you.
lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Been a great